Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and this is Arroyo Live. I'd like to ask each of you to please take a moment to tell our viewers a little about yourselves. Brian, let's begin with you.
Good evening, Joe, and thanks for having us. My name is Brian McDonald, and I'm the superintendent of schools for the Pasadena Unified School District. I am in my 10th year in the district, but my 7th year as the superintendent. The prior 3 years, I was the chief academic officer for the school system. And prior to that, I spent 20 years in the Houston Independent School District, starting as a high school mathematics teacher and working my way up the ranks as assistant principal in 2 different locations, as well as a school improvement officer where I supervised a number of middle schools in the district. And so I'm happy to be joining you this evening.
Well, thank you very much. We certainly do appreciate that. And Michelle, how about you?
Hi, I'm Michelle Richardson-Bailey, and I have been on the school board now for 3 years. I was elected in 2017. Prior to that, I worked in the school district for 14 years. And I grew up here in Pasadena, went to school here in Pasadena. I was a commissioner on both the Human Relations Commission and the Northwest Commission for a total of 14 years, and have served on the executive committee of the Pasadena branch of the NAACP. And I just have done numerous volunteer jobs here in the local community in Pasadena. So I'm excited to be here this evening. Thank you.
Fantastic. Again, thank you both for joining me this evening. I know our viewers at home certainly do appreciate it as well. As is typically the case with our program, we generally start off with one very important question, and that is how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected each of our guests on a personal note. So I'd like to ask that of both of you this evening as well. And again, Brian, if it's all right, we'll begin with you. How has COVID-19 affected you at home and just in your personal life?
Well, I am not only the superintendent, but a parent in the district as well. And needless to say, it has been quite difficult to be in a space with 5 kids, 4 of them being students in our district, and 1 being a college student. Of course, as you know, we've been sequestered for some time, and people tend to get cabin fever, and we're no different. And so in large part, I've been here in my office conducting meetings and so forth. And a lot of the daily routines around the house have been left up to my wife. So I really thank her for her support and for what she's done in terms of taking care of this family. But it has been quite difficult. I feel like my days have been longer than when I've had to report to the office. But of course, the work that I do is important work, as it benefits our students and staff in our school system.
All right. Michelle, how about yourself? How has the COVID pandemic affected you and your day-to-day operations?
I think totally opposite from the way it's affected the superintendent. It's brought some calm to my life. I don't have the school-age children at home. I'm able to do everything from home, which cuts down on running here, running there, trying to get to places on time. So, and I just value that right now because I've done so much running that you get exhausted just from trying to drive from point A to point B every day. So the one thing that I can say has been the disadvantage is that I love to cook and I love to eat. So that's that. I have a lot of work to do to work that all off. But for pretty much, I just sit in front of my computer most days. I'm back in school again. So, between homework and meetings from the different committees that I serve on, and I'm here at home and I'm loving it. it hasn't affected me that way. Personally, it's affected me because I have personal friends whose relatives have come down with the disease. I haven't had anybody that's been really close that I know that has passed away. But yeah, and that's a kind of an emotional thing, when friends call up to say that their dad has it, or, someone close to them has it. Basically, I'm doing okay.
Well, we're certainly happy to hear that nothing terrible has befallen either of you thus far.
Mm.
Certainly, if you spend any time at all watching media of any kind, or listening to the radio, uh, reading newspapers, it's inescapable that we are seeing the numbers of those infected and those hospitalized surging. There was hope early on that the summer months would see a decrease in these cases, but in fact, it seems, at least here on the West Coast, we're seeing quite the opposite. And of course, as everyone is well aware, we've been dealing with the situation since before the end of the previous school year. Now it seems that the new school year is just about upon us, and there is a lot of discussion as to how we are going to approach the coming of the new school year. Within the last day or so, LA Unified has announced that it does not intend to bring students back in to its campus, and a few other districts have subsequently followed suit. Most notably and most recently, the Pasadena Unified School District just announced that this afternoon. So, what are the challenges that we are going to face as a result of the continued distance learning model?
Well, the first challenge I think that we will face is some equity issues with regard to especially those students that are furthest from opportunity. Very clearly, technology is an issue. We've tried to address that by going to a one-to-one environment in the last 3 or so years, where each child in the district has access to a Chromebook, a laptop. And through a partnership with Sprint, we've been able to procure and distribute hotspots so that families will have internet access. Of course, despite our best efforts, we know that we haven't been able to reach some families, especially families that will be new to our district. And so the difficulty will be reaching those families, assessing what their needs are, their technological needs, and then providing them with the tools that they need. In addition to that, along the same lines, we have families that, I guess the terminology is food deficient, if you will. And we have done our best to address this issue in terms of meal distribution ever since we closed our schools to in-person instruction in early March. And so again, the challenge will be making sure that our students and families are fed. And then, needless to say, the difficulty in providing instruction in an online environment is the number of hours that students will have access to their teachers in a synchronous or live setting. So we're trying to address that issue through the online program that we're developing. And what we're looking to do is to partner with a university that has a fully fleshed out online program. And we will do this in conjunction with our curriculum, our curricular tools, as well as our technological tools. So, there are a lot of issues that we can anticipate. There are a lot of issues that we probably will not be able to anticipate until we're actually dealing with them. But we have an excellent team, and we, I think, have been pretty responsive to the needs of our families, to the needs of our staff as well. And we conducted a survey a few months ago, and we got a pretty good response. The response rate was pretty high. And overwhelmingly, our families, our students, and our staff felt like we had responded appropriately to their needs. And so we believe that we can adequately address the needs of our students and our families and our staff. But of course, we will need additional resources to do this in an efficient and effective manner.
Well, Brian, you touch on an interesting point there, because as you mentioned in your previous response, initially we were forced to look at distance learning as the new norm for the remainder of the school year back in March. And I don't think anyone really saw that coming. So it seemed that school districts were in a hurry to try and put together, cobble anything that they could so that the students weren't left high and dry. And for many districts, that model was 1 or 2 days of a couple hours of online instruction per week. And that was about it. And in fact, I think many districts didn't even attempt to continue grading beyond March. But obviously, if we have to begin a new school year that way and potentially continue on for some time in that fashion, there has to be a more comprehensive approach in the fall. So what is a typical distance learning school day going to look like?
Okay, so I'll just address something that you mentioned, and that is that many districts were caught unawares. They were caught off guard and not prepared. I wouldn't classify PUSD as being one of those districts that wasn't prepared, because like I mentioned, we were in a one-to-one environment in terms of technology. So our students had the technology. We'd issued the hotspots. We put together a curriculum that could be executed online. And we had people working around the clock to make sure that this happened. So much so that even one of our graduation requirements, which was a graduate defense, we were able to complete those even while we were in a remote environment. So I think as a district, we were very well prepared, and we were able to respond appropriately. Now, having said that, were there some hiccups? Of course there were. We had teachers that had never taught in an online environment before, and they were doing the best that they could possibly do. And I think for the most part, they did an excellent job. Now, going into this new school year, we've had the benefit of having gone through that experience. We've learned a few things, which is why we're looking at partnering with ASU, Arizona State University, to come up with an online program that aligns to our curriculum and that will address some of the areas of concern that we, along with our parents, have. So I think we're very well prepared to begin the school year in an online environment. I feel like we will address the areas of concern, and I think families will be very satisfied with what we have to offer. Our teachers are ready. They're primed and ready to go. We have an excellent group of teachers and administrators who can effectively execute the program that we've come up with.
From a technology standpoint, what are school districts prepared to do to help facilitate students in the learning from home environment? We have seen in the media very recently, because this has suddenly become quite a topic of discussion, that there are families, lower income families, that are ill prepared to deal with this situation from a technological standpoint. Some families simply do not have really stable internet connections. There are still families that don't have internet at all. And of course, it also requires access to computer systems. Is the school district facilitated to help these families with this type of difficulty?
I think so. One of the strengths, I believe, in living in the Pasadena area is the number of community partners that are willing to come alongside us to provide support to our kids. so we've had a number of community partners that have provided this kind of training and support with our help to families. Additionally, we implemented um, a drive-through tech support system over at our district service center, where families could simply drive up, and address the technological needs that they had. And then, of course, we make ourselves available to provide any kind of training that families need. The principals, the teachers are all very supportive. The teachers reach out to the families on a daily basis to try to figure out what their needs are, and we try to address those needs. So again, I think that we are in a position to provide all of the hardware that the families need. And we're also in a position to provide, through a help desk, any kind of support, in repairing the technology, in assisting families with how to utilize the technology. So we have that kind of support system in place that will help our families get through this.
All right. Another thing that has recently surfaced in the media is the discussion about whether districts should be attempting to bring students back on campus in the fall, or whether the distance learning model is the more appropriate course of action. And in pursuing that line of story, we have seen interviews with teachers who have openly stated that they are concerned about the idea of returning to school for a number of reasons, not the least of which are their own personal safety and the safety of their respective families. Mm-hmm. But is it safe to say that that's not the overriding reasoning for the school district's decision to not return students to school in the fall? It's really about overall safety of all persons involved?
Oh, absolutely. And, I like to use the phrase safety above all else. And, I certainly wouldn't want to have it on my conscience to bring students and staff back to a school site and then have an outbreak that ends up costing somebody their life. This is something that I've thought about long and hard. And even before the spike in the virus, I'll give you an illustrative example. Let's say that we start in the hybrid model. So we have a cohort of students in a face-to-face environment with their teacher, and somebody gets sick. Maybe the teacher, somebody contracts the virus, maybe the teacher, maybe a student. If that occurs, then we would have to sequester, or they would have to self-quarantine the entire class and anybody that they come in contact with, maybe in the after-school program. So this could be hugely problematic, not just from the standpoint of somebody possibly losing their life, but also the disruption that would cause in the lives of families. So that to me is the overarching reason why, it is important for us to start the school year in an online environment, and not just because somebody said, well, I'm concerned about that's important. We always worry about that. But the overarching issue is that we want to keep students and staff safe. And in doing so, we will be doing our part to keep the community safe.
You bring up an interesting point, Brian, that there are far-reaching ramifications if someone in a classroom should come down with the virus. Interestingly enough, at least so far, apparently Orange County, which has seen some pretty significant numbers, increases in their infection rates, is at this point planning to bring students back into the classroom at the beginning of the school year. Short of a vaccine being introduced, do either of you see a way to safely bring students back into the classroom?
For me, I would have to see a significant decrease in the number of cases and the number of deaths. I would have to see very few cases on a daily basis. That would cause me to feel some level of comfort in reopening schools. And of course, we always follow the guidance of the health professionals, our local Pasadena Health Department, as well as the county health department. And so, we're making a decision, and we'll go semester by semester. So if things improve, if the conditions on the ground improve by semester break in December, then we might be able or in a position to make a different decision as far as what the learning environment will look like. But as it stands right now, with a number of cases rising on a daily basis, there is no way that I would feel comfortable making a recommendation to the board that we begin the school year or transition to a face-to-face environment, or even a hybrid environment for that matter.
Yeah, I agree. Safety is first with me as a board member. That's what's guiding any decision that I make around this matter. It would just be horrific if someone was to come down with COVID inside of one of our classrooms and, present the potential of infecting other students and teachers. I don't think that I would be able to live with myself knowing that I made a decision to bring everyone back to school at this time. There's just not enough information out there about how to slow this spread, and it's just not under control. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Brian is saying about this issue.
All right. That's definitely a very important note. I'm curious, though, even though the distance learning model will be the one employed at the beginning of the school year, Brian, you did mention that you will be keeping the door open should the circumstances improve, and as you have stated, they would have to improve dramatically in order to consider reintroducing a more normal educational cycle. But with the distance learning model in effect, will there still need to be some staff members present on a daily basis on campuses for administrative purposes? And if that is the case, is there enough PPE to go around to protect those workers that do have to come back to school?
So I imagine that it would be a similar circumstance to what we've gone through this summer, where we had a system in place where in order for someone to access the campus, they had to first notify the person who was designated to gather this information. And then that person would then coordinate the site visit, making sure that we didn't have more than, let's say, 10 people on the site at any given time, and then making sure that the site was sanitized after people left. So we would follow a similar procedure where we wouldn't have more than, let's say, 10 people at any given site. And that would include, of course, the principal, the office manager, the custodians, and so forth. If a teacher needed to access the site for one reason or another, they would simply follow that protocol. We would make sure that they safely access the site. We would make sure that once they leave and once everybody leaves, we sanitize that site. So in that way, we keep people safe.
All right. Due in part, at least, to some of the recent protests, there had been discussion about reducing funding for school police departments all over the country. However, that may prove to be a moot point if, in fact, we have to maintain this distance learning model for some time to come. With that in mind, is there an avenue for redirecting some of the funds that might have been used for school policing to the districts in other areas? More more likely to be used for educational purposes. Is that a possibility?
So some years ago, and Miss Bailey might remember what year this was, but in one round of budget cuts, we eliminated our police department, our school district police department. So we no longer have our own police department. We were using school resource officers that were provided to us through an MOU with the city of Pasadena. A few years ago, when Chief Sanchez was still the chief, because of budget cuts, those school resource officers were redeployed for city use. So as a result, we do not expend any funds whatsoever for police support, except when we have events like the Turkey Tussle or some event like that where we need some kind of security assistance. But there aren't any funds that we spend on the police that we would need to redeploy for educational purposes.
Okay, well, under the distance learning model, are there provisions for extracurricular activities like sporting events or music, or is all of that, at least for the near term, a thing of the past?
Well, as it relates to the arts and specifically music, our music teachers have been able to continue to provide instruction to our students remotely. So, so we will still continue to do that. As far as sports are concerned, we will not be participating in any contact sports. And of course, since we're in a remote environment, we won't be participating in any sports whatsoever until the conditions change. So again, we're guided by the science. We're guided by the local health department as well as the county health department. And when it's safe to do so, we will resume physical education activities, specifically sports related to team sports at our high schools or middle schools.
Okay. Now I want to get a little bit off the topic of education just for a moment. Certainly, it was recognized early on the importance of the school lunch program and how there are many, many students who depend upon the school lunch program and the breakfast programs as well as an avenue for perhaps the most nutritious meal they see during any day. And with that in mind, many school districts across the country continued to hand out food for meals during the closing months of the previous school year, as well as over the summer. Is that going to continue with the distance learning model beginning in the new school year?
Yes, that will continue. And let me just say that I'm very proud of our food services team. We handed out 590,000 meals during that period of time. And we did so not just by ourselves, but with support from our community partners. I can name a few and have them written down so I don't leave anybody out. We have the city of Pasadena that came alongside us, especially when we had to temporarily suspend our grab and go program. We have the Rose Bowl Operating Company that also came alongside us and with the city provided meals to families on the weekends. The Pasadena Educational Foundation that provided volunteers to assist with this effort. Collaborate Pasadena, PACTO, LA84, and numerous other organizations really came alongside us and made a difference in terms of making sure that our families were fed. Going into this new school year, we will continue this program. As a matter of fact, it is continuing through the summer. The city is also providing lunches to families on the weekends, I believe on Saturdays, maybe on Sundays as well. So we will continue to provide the service even while kids are in a remote environment.
All right. As I mentioned earlier, it certainly has become a very important topic of discussion in recent days. What exactly we are going to be doing with school, whether there'll be a distance learning model in place in districts around the country, or whether the doors to the campuses themselves will reopen. And as we've seen in the media, it seems that there's almost, at least the media would lead us to believe, a 50-50 split in terms of parents, whether they would prefer to keep their children at home for safety reasons or whether they want their children to go back on campus. We have seen parents citing the need for physical interaction between other students as part of emotional development. But perhaps an even larger issue is that parents still need to work, and they, for want of a better explanation, use school not only to educate their children, but also as a form of daycare. What challenges does this new distance model present? And are there plans to help overcome those obstacles?
It presents a significant challenge. And that's one of the things that keep me up at night. Because I worry about, especially those families who must work, those low-income families that if they don't work, there's no food on the table. How will we provide childcare for those families? And even our emergency response personnel, they have to work as well. They have to keep us safe. Who will take care of their kids? So those are things that I do worry about. And like I said, it keeps me up at night. So we will be discussing this very issue with our community partners in the very near future. We do have a plan, a district plan, but it's not enough. We would be able to provide some support through our LEARNS program, which is our after-school program, as well as our early childhood education program. As a matter of fact, that program continues to provide support even now during this crisis. But we must have a conversation with the city of Pasadena. They have resources that they can bring to bear on this. We must have a conversation with the county. We must have a conversation with some of our other community partners like the Boys and Girls Club and so forth. So we will be convening a meeting probably the next week or two to discuss how we can come together to make sure that these families are supported. There are numerous community partners who have indicated that they want to come alongside us, and we're going to take them up on their offer.
All right. Well, you mentioned numerous groups that are wanting to assist, but also, are there avenues that our viewers at home can contribute as well? Is there ways that they can donate time and or monies to help the school system and these programs?
Absolutely. There are a number of ways that the community can support our efforts. I would say first and foremost, and just help us follow the guidelines so that we can slow down the spread of this virus and eventually stop it. Just stay informed and connected to us through our website. And we have a microsite, and it's PUSD.US/COVID-19. It's right on our front page. And most importantly, donate to the PEF, Pasadena Educational Foundation's Response Fund. They've raised a significant amount of money so far to support our efforts, but we need to raise more. So I would say go on the PEF's website, Pasadena Educational Foundation, and donate if you can. And then, of course, just remember to vote in the November election regarding national and local issues. We will have a school bond measure on the ballot in November. And this will be primarily to ensure that we can continue to provide the services that students need, especially in the area of technology. Um, we have to replace the Chromebooks that we've distributed to students. We have to continue to provide the hotspots. We have aging servers that will cost a significant amount of money to replace. The infrastructure, the technology infrastructure needs to be upgraded, as well as some of our sites. So those are some of the ways that I believe that the community can support our efforts, but especially please donate to the PEF's Response Fund, because those funds will go directly to the support of our students.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add, I wanted to go back. We receive emails from parents and concerned community members and employees. And I've received several today where there are some people who are giving in to the conspiracy theories that are out there and, kind of citing the data that they're saying that younger kids don't get this disease. Younger kids get this disease. It's just that they have not been out as frequently and in the large gatherings as the adults. And so you have to look at the numbers. When you're looking at the data, people can aggregate data to say what they needed to say when they're trying to prove a point. This disease is real. All you have to do is look around you. People are really dying. Do not give in to the conspiracy theorists out there. Don't listen to what they're saying. Be wise, just work with us because we are trying to really do what's best for the students and their families and the employees' families as well. And with regards to the bond, this is a very important bond for technology for the district, especially if distance learning is going to be possibly a norm. I mean, we really need to invest in the technology infrastructure of the district. So I implore all of you as well who are out there, learn what you can about this bond. Don't jump to the conclusions about whatever you thought, how things were handled in the past. Let's look forward. Let's put the district in a position where we can support these children, support their learning so that they get a quality education, whether they're at home or in the classroom through technology.
Michelle, I would also take an opportunity to mention that you were discussing the conspiracy theory, I believe is how you described it, that the children are less susceptible to the virus or to coming down with severe symptoms as a result of the virus. And even though there certainly have been documented stories where children have, in fact, come down with COVID and suffered severe symptoms, and there have even been a couple of deaths, it's probably also important to note that while the vast majority of the children might even be asymptomatic carriers, they're still carriers and could very easily bring that virus to someone who is highly susceptible to it.
True. That is a good point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Something else that's interesting, we have seen in recent days that our current administration has suggested that if schools don't open their doors in the fall, that there might be steps taken to cut off state and local funding. Is the PUSD prepared to weather such a storm? And what about other districts across the country? Is this a very real possibility? Is this something that you are concerned about?
Well, somewhat concerned, but I don't know. I'm not sure I understand how that would work. Because the funding that we receive from the federal government are all title funds, and those are appropriated through the budget process. So I'm not really sure how those funds could be withheld. I guess there's maybe some way that it could be done. What I see as, is, and I'm not even sure if the Congress passes some kind of a stimulus bill that provides funding to states, I'm not sure what the mechanism would be to withhold those funds. But be that as it may, my concern again is for the safety of our students and our staff. So I can't worry about what the politicians may or may not do. All I can worry about is making sure that I keep our students and staff safe, and that we do the best that we can to make sure that every child gets a quality education in the PUSD.
And that's what's going to stand out to people in the long run. Yeah, I'm not concerned about the threats that are coming from the nation's leader at this point. I'm really concerned, though, about the impacts that it's going to have on our families going to the distance learning model. I totally get it, but I'm trusting that our staff is going to be creative in coming up with ways to support our families. And we know we need to give them the space to be able to create. And so as a board member, that I believe is my role, to allow them to do what they have to do and then share it with us. And so that we can all share in whatever the needs are for getting our kids what they need to have a quality education.
Well, since the distance learning model is definitely the reality for the near future, and there's no telling how long we may be dealing with the distance model, talk us through some of the challenges that we are facing in the coming weeks?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is we first have to iron out all the details as far as, what the distance learning program will look like. Of course, we have to identify the funding for this. And that might mean that we reallocate funds from other things that we've allocated funds for in order to fund this effort. And then, and I want to point out that we did survey our families, and we had a pretty high response rate. I think we had 13,000 out of the 16,000 families respond, and overwhelmingly they asked for an online instructional model. So I just wanted to make that clear. But of course, we have to continue with our planning, we have to determine how we're going to make sure that our teachers are properly trained. So this new online program will call for 5 days of intensive training. Our teachers come back, I think, 3 days prior to the start of the school year. So we have to figure out how we would get those 2 additional days of training in. So there are logistical issues such as those. The technological aspect of it, making sure that our servers, can handle this additional demand, because we've moved to a new learning management system, and so we'll be doing, a lot of the instruction online through this learning management system. So it's all of these little logistical issues that all add up to, ensuring that, if they're addressed, ensuring that we have a robust online system for our kids.
Well, since the start of COVID here and the stay-at-home orders and the sequestration that has resulted from the pandemic, we have heard of many adults that are facing emotional issues, depressive issues as a result of the isolation. It is not a much of a reach to assume that children may be facing similar difficulties. Is there a program in place or some kind of mechanism to assist children that may be dealing with the stress of being stuck at home all the time?
Well, yes. And, I want to thank our child welfare attendance and safety department that's under the school support services, student support services division, for the excellent work that they've done in providing mental health support via telemed through the clinicians that we have in our mental health department, and to our partners as well who have come alongside us to provide this kind of support to our students. Needless to say, these are difficult times. Being sequestered at home is not an easy thing, and even as adults, we get cabin fever. We find ourselves climbing the walls, right? Much less the kids, right? So, and of course, like I mentioned before, I have 5 of them here, so I know firsthand, what that feels like, and I know firsthand what the kids are going through, because they can't get out and be with their friends. They can't do their normal activities. They're here at home, getting on each other's nerves and so forth. So we do have that level of support that we provide to our students and families. And again, I thank our student support services division for the work that they're doing in that regard.
All right. You did mention that perhaps at some point in the future, and I believe you said you'd look at it on a semester by semester basis, but if we're fortunate enough that the numbers begin to decline at some point in the future, that it might be cause to consider reopening the campuses and allowing the students to come back to school, at least in some modified program. That would probably still require people to wear masks. Mm-hmm. Are you prepared to deal with students who refuse?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. When we were planning to open using the hybrid model as our means of delivering instruction, that was one of the things that we heard very loud and clear from our parents in terms of the feedback that they gave us when we presented our plan. And that was that they wanted us to mandate the wearing of masks. And so we agree that this is one of the best ways to prevent the spread of the virus. And so we believe that it's something important to require that students and staff comply with. Now, again, when you're dealing with kids, you have to be wise like a fox. I mean, you don't always use the hammer when you're dealing with them. You have to encourage them to do the right thing. You have to encourage the parents to impress upon the kids that this is something that's important. So, there's no set way of, we certainly wouldn't suspend a child just because they refuse to comply. That's not what we want to do. But we would do our very best to encourage them to wear their mask by explaining the importance of it. I think we have to give credit to kids. If you take the time to explain things to them, they'll usually get it and they'll respond positively, as opposed to when you try to force them to do something. So that's the way that we would approach it.
All right. And going even a little further, we have heard suggestions for some time now that perhaps as early as the end of this year and likely the beginning of next year, that we may finally begin to see viable vaccines appearing on the market. If and when that time comes, do you then require a student to have been vaccinated before returning to campus? And again, if so, what happens if they don't comply?
Well, that's a situation where we would follow state and local guidelines. There is a requirement at the state level that students have, the required vaccinations. And if they don't have them, then there's action that we can take. So certainly we wouldn't want to get into a tug of war with parents around, their child getting a vaccine. This obviously is something that could save their life. So we would hope that families would comply, given the seriousness of this. So, of course, we would follow the guidance of the state and local officials, and use whatever tools are available to us to ensure that parents comply with that requirement, if it is a requirement at the state level.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, as of now, the vaccine is still a pie in the sky sort of scenario, although we have every reason to believe there will be one forthcoming. We simply may not see one until next year. With that in mind, is the PUSD, and do you think perhaps other school districts as well, are they prepared to conduct the entire next school year on the distance learning model?
Yes, we would be prepared to do so. We are also prepared to nimbly move from one model to the other, right? So if the conditions change and we need to go to the hybrid model, we can do that. We can move back to online if we needed to do that, and we can do it pretty quickly. If the conditions improve so dramatically that there isn't any trace of the virus around, we can go back to a regular setting. So we have all of our plans in place. We're still working out some final details, but I think we're nimble enough to be able to move from one model to the other. But to answer your specific question, we are prepared to continue in this online environment for the entire year.
All right. Do you foresee any special funding that might be made available either at the local level or the state level or even the federal level as this continues, and assuming that the distance learning model is required to remain in place for a lengthy period of time?
So specifically to the PUSD, as a part of the allocation of funding or the appropriation from the state, we were given a $15 million carve out to respond specifically to this pandemic. Of course, this is not an additional pot of money above and beyond what we should have received. So by that, I mean, we're receiving the same level of funding this school year that we received last school year, with the exception of the cost of living adjustment, which is a little over 2%. So that amounts to about $5 to $7 million for us. So we will not be receiving that money. So, so now we have this $15 million carve out that is restricted because it can only be spent on our response to the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, the state is hopeful, the state legislature and the governor are hopeful that additional stimulus dollars will flow from the federal government. We're hopeful as well because the state legislature went out on a limb to provide the same level of funding as last year, even though there is, I think it's a $34 billion hole in their budget. So needless to say, any dollars flowing from the feds would go a far way to plug that budget hole. But of course, it would help us with providing the services that students need during this difficult time.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we're coming down to the closing minutes of the show. In fact, we only have a couple left. I know that you have mentioned that the PUSD in particular has been in a pretty good position to weather this most recent storm. But there's always more that can be done to be prepared. And so I would like to ask this last question to the both of you. What does the PUSD still lack? What could it use to help lessen the burden moving forward as we continue with this distance learning model?
Um, again, we have to refresh our technology, and that's going to be huge. The Chromebooks are breaking, they're aging. Like I said, we have significant infrastructure needs, technology infrastructure needs. We have to provide PPE to our staff if and when we come back this year in a face-to-face environment. There are numerous needs that we have. The increased cost to provide meals to a significant number of families, many more than we've had to provide last year. That's an increased cost. Also, another area of cost for us is, all of the training that we have to provide to our employees in order for them to be completely prepared for this new normal. So, and there are other needs as well. So I could go on and on, but we really do need additional resources. We're having to provide instruction that is significantly more costly, with less funds than we received last year. So, to be quite frank, I would say at least an additional $7 to $10 million would be very, very helpful to our cause. Just to provide context, our overall budget is over $200 million. So in the overall scheme of things, $5 to $7 million is a drop in the budget, or 7 to 10 rather is a drop in the budget, but it would certainly be helpful to our cause in helping our students.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm afraid we have run out of time. Superintendent Dr. Brian McDonald, PUSD board member, Michelle Richardson-Bailey. Thank you both for joining me this evening. It has truly been an enlightening conversation, and we certainly hope that they can find a way to make up for those budget shortfalls. To you at home, if there are topics you would like to see addressed in our discussions, you can email them to us at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may try and include them in a future broadcast. This has been Arroyo Live. Thank you for watching, and good night.